Lieutenant Commander Renee Dawson had spent years serving her country, leading teams through high-stakes military operations, making decisions that carried weight far beyond what most people could comprehend. But none of that mattered the moment she saw red and blue lights flashing in her rearview mirror. It was late, nearly midnight, the stretch of highway outside Birmingham, Alabama, nearly empty. The occasional car passed, headlights bouncing off the slick pavement, but otherwise, it was just her. She had been driving for 2 hours, her mind still replaying the classified briefing she had left earlier that evening. The rhythm of an old jazz tune hummed softly through her speakers, her fingers tapping absent-mindedly against the wheel. She wasn't in uniform, just a black sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in a low ponytail. She didn't stand out, but apparently she did. When she first saw the lights, she sighed, not out of fear. She had faced far worse than a routine traffic stop, but out of exhaustion. She had seen this play out before, not personally, but she had read the reports, seen the statistics. A black woman driving alone at night, that was often enough. Still, she did everything right, signaled, slowed down, pulled onto the shoulder, and parked, took a deep breath, and placed both hands where they could be seen. The white patrol car rolled to a stop behind her, the officer taking his time stepping out. He moved like a man who expected obedience. His boots scuffed against the asphalt, one hand resting on his belt, close to his holster, the other gripping a flashlight. Renee watched him in the side mirror. The name on his badge caught the light. Briggs. His voice was flat, impatient. License and registration. No greeting, no explanation. She moved slowly, keeping her hands visible as she reached into the glove compartment. "Was I speeding, officer?" she asked, voice level. Briggs didn't answer immediately. He took the papers, holding them just out of reach, as his eyes roamed over her car like he was looking for something, anything to justify the stop. Then, finally, "Taillights out." Renee frowned. "That can't be right." Briggs's gaze snapped to her, his lips curling slightly. "Are you arguing with me?" The shift in the air was immediate. That quiet, unspoken moment where power met resistance, and one side expected the other to cave. She knew better than to push too hard, but she also knew her rights. "I'm just saying," she replied carefully, "my taillights were checked a few weeks ago. But if there's an issue, I can get it fixed." Briggs didn't acknowledge her words. Instead, he stepped back and said, "Step out of the car." Renee's stomach tightened. There was no reason for this. She glanced ahead. No witnesses. Her fingers tapped against the wheel once before she reached for the door handle. "Mind telling me why?" Briggs smirked. "Because I said so." She let the silence stretch. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, she unbuckled her seatbelt and pushed the door open. The night air was cooler than she expected. She wasn't looking for a fight, but she wasn't going to be bullied either. Briggs took a step back, scanning her. She could feel him sizing her up, deciding how much he could get away with. Turn around, hands on the car. For what reason? Briggs stepped closer, the smirk gone. "Are you resisting?" She held her ground. I'm asking a question." A flicker of something crossed his face. Annoyance? Amusement? Both? Then, without warning, he reached for his radio. "We got a non-compliant driver here." His voice was low, almost lazy. Then, louder, "Turn around." Renee's heartbeat stayed steady, but she could feel the shift. This was a game to him, a test. He wanted her to break first. She had two choices: comply and fight this later, or push back and risk escalation. She wasn't about to become another statistic. With slow, deliberate movements, she turned, placing her hands on the roof of her car. The metal was cool against her palms. Briggs wasted no time. The cuffs were too tight. He did it on purpose. And then, without another word, he shoved her toward the patrol car. "You don't know what you're doing," she murmured. Briggs chuckled, slamming the door behind her. "Lady, I know exactly what I'm doing." But he didn't, not even close. And soon, he was going to regret every single decision that led him here. The ride to the station was silent, except for Briggs. "You must really think you're somebody." Renee didn't respond. "You military?" he asked suddenly, his tone shifting. She didn't answer. "Yeah, I figured," he muttered. "You got that attitude, that above-the-law type. Bet you thought I'd back off, huh?" Still, she said nothing. Shame, he mused. If you just kept your mouth shut, we could have avoided all this. Her jaw tightened, the audacity of it, as if his actions were her fault. The station came into view, a squat gray brick building. The lot was mostly empty. Late-night processing was slow. Briggs pulled into a reserved spot, killed the engine, and turned to look at her. Gotta say, he murmured, I do love when they make it easy. A few minutes later, she was inside, going through booking, fingerprinting, mugshot, the whole routine. And all the while, Briggs smirked. As he led her toward the holding cells, he leaned in slightly. See, here's the thing, he said, lowering his voice. People like you think the rules don't apply. You think a little confidence is enough to get out of trouble. She let him talk, let him ramble, because he didn't know what was coming. Then, as if on cue, another officer approached. A younger guy, late 20s, clipboard in hand. Sergeant? Briggs barely glanced at him. The officer hesitated, shifted on his feet. We got a call. I think you need to see this. Briggs frowned, then stepped away. She listened. The voices were hushed, but she caught bits and pieces. Lawyer, higher-ups, questions. Briggs's voice dropped lower, sharp and annoyed. Then he stormed back into view, his jaw tight, fists clenched. What the hell did you do? Renee leaned forward, elbows on her knees. I didn't do anything. She tilted her head. But people talk, and some of us have friends in very high places. Briggs's face darkened. The realization was sinking in. He wasn't in control anymore. He turned on his heel, muttering under his breath, and disappeared down the hallway. It wouldn't be long now. And when the truth came out, Briggs was going to regret every single decision he had made. Morning light spilled through the courthouse windows, casting long streaks across the polished floors. The air inside was crisp, the kind of cold that settled deep in your bones if you sat still too long. Renee Dawson wasn't in handcuffs anymore. No orange jumpsuit, no holding cell. Just a well-tailored navy blue blazer, a simple blouse, and an undeniable presence. Beside her, her attorney Carla Whitman flipped through a thick stack of papers, barely glancing up as people filtered into the courtroom. Methodical, precise, no wasted movement. Renee liked that. Then the heavy wooden doors swung open. Briggs walked in. He still carried himself like he owned the room. Chin up, shoulders squared, that same air of superiority. But there was a difference now, a stiffness in his step, a flicker of something in his expression. He wasn't sure of himself anymore. Renee caught his eye. He looked away. Good. A moment later, Judge Alan Kirkland entered, an older man, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, with a weary expression. He adjusted his glasses. All right, he sighed. Let's get to it. The prosecutor, a man with neatly combed hair and a voice that could cut through steel, stood up. Your Honor, we have reason to believe Lieutenant Commander Renee Dawson was unlawfully detained without probable cause. Furthermore, new evidence suggests a pattern of misconduct involving the arresting officer, Sergeant Daniel Briggs. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Briggs shifted in his seat, jaw tightening. The judge peered over his glasses. Sergeant Briggs, care to explain? Briggs leaned forward, clearing his throat. Your Honor, the defendant was uncooperative during a routine traffic stop. The prosecutor cut him off. Uncooperative? He lifted a document from the table. Lieutenant Commander Dawson's record shows a distinguished military career, graduate of the Naval Academy, multiple commendations, no criminal history, no outstanding citations. Are you telling me that despite all this, she was such a threat that you had to arrest her? Over a broken taillight. The murmurs grew louder. Briggs opened his mouth, then shut it. The prosecutor wasn't finished. He turned another page. Additionally, an internal review of your arrest history shows a disproportionate number of traffic stops involving black drivers in this district. The murmurs turned into whispers. Briggs' face darkened. Judge Kirkland exhaled. Sergeant, I don't like what I'm hearing. Briggs crossed his arms. She resisted. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. The body cam footage says otherwise. A hush fell over the room. The judge looked toward the bailiff. Play the footage. A screen lowered at the front of the courtroom. Renee didn't turn to watch. She had lived it. Briggs barking orders, her calm, measured voice. the unnecessary escalation, the smug way he had tightened the cuffs, and then the moment that sealed his fate. Briggs chuckling, "Lady, I know exactly what I'm doing." The courtroom was dead silent. The video ended. Judge Kirkland steepled his fingers. "Sergeant Briggs, you violated protocol. You conducted an unlawful arrest, and you failed to report the full details in your initial statement." Briggs' face flushed red. "Your Honor, I was following standard procedure." The judge wasn't buying it. His gavel came down. "The charges against Lieutenant Commander Dawson are hereby dismissed. Furthermore, I strongly suggest an internal investigation into Sergeant Briggs' conduct." The room erupted. Briggs looked like he had been punched in the gut, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Renee simply exhaled, slowly, controlled. She never had a doubt. As she gathered her things, she glanced at Briggs one last time. Their eyes met. No words were exchanged. They didn't need to be. Because this time, she wasn't the one fighting for her reputation. Briggs was. Briggs stormed out of the courtroom. His footsteps echoed through the hallways. He could feel the eyes on him. Other officers, court staff, reporters. He wasn't used to this. He was used to control, to commanding fear, to bending the system to his advantage. Not today. Then, the worst part. "Sergeant Briggs!" A sharp voice cut through the hallway noise. Briggs turned. Chief Eldon Baker stood, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "My office, now." Briggs straightened. "Sir." Baker didn't let him finish. "Now." Inside, the chief tossed a file onto the desk. It landed with a heavy thud. "What the hell were you thinking?" Briggs exhaled. "I was doing my job." "Your job?" Baker scoffed. "That's not what it looks like." He flipped the file open. Body cam footage, arrest history, complaint after complaint. Briggs gritted his teeth. She was disrespectful. Baker's expression hardened. "She questioned you. That's not a crime." Silence. Then Baker leaned in. "The DA is reviewing every single one of your cases. If they find what I think they'll find, your career is over." Briggs' stomach twisted. "What does that mean?" Baker stood. "It means you're on immediate suspension, and if I were you, I'd get a lawyer." Briggs felt his world unraveling, and for the first time in his career, he realized he wasn't untouchable. Renee sat in a quiet cafe, stirring her coffee. The case had already made headlines. "Lieutenant Commander wrongfully arrested, officer under investigation." Alarma. She wasn't surprised. Her phone buzzed. A message from her attorney. "Briggs has been suspended, might face charges." She took a slow sip. "Good." Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Director Dawson." A pause. Then, "I just wanted to say thank you." She recognized the voice, the witness from the night. Most people wouldn't have fought back. Renee exhaled. "Most people don't have the power to..." A pause. "But I do. And for the first time in a long time," she felt something close to hope. Power unchecked is power abused. What happened to Renee happens every day. People who don't have the privilege of rank, evidence, or a legal team to fight back. That's why speaking up matters. If this story made you think, share it. If it made you angry, talk about it. And if it made you realize how much work is left to do, stay engaged. Because real change starts with real conversations.